Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this NYCP teach-in. My name is Lisa Marshall. I'm the Director of Organizing and Advocacy at New Yorkers for Clean Power, and we're so happy to have with us today a wonderful panel of speakers who are going to speak about New York's state energy planning process and how we can why it's important, what and how we can get involved. And we'll have an opportunity to take action after our panel is done presenting. And then we have an opportunity for Q&A from all of you. So I'm going to get us kicked off now. People are still entering, but we're just going to get going. Next slide, please. So what is the State Energy Plan? This slide is actually taken from the State Energy Planning Board's presentation back in September. This is in New York, by statute, we have to put out a new state energy plan every 5 years. And this is to assess our future energy needs and how we're going to meet them. We actually have not done this process very recently because we did have the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act and the scoping plan that came out of that. And so instead of the state energy planning process happening at that time, we just used the scoping plan as sort of the interim state energy plan. So now it's time to incorporate the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act into the state energy plan and start planning again for the future through 2040. Which we all know is a very critical timeline for to meet our climate targets, and that we have to really accomplish a very big transformation of our energy system in this time frame. So it's a very, very important process, although it may sound a little boring. Next slide. So the state energy plan, this is again what this planning board put out. These aren't my slides. These are just my screenshots of their slides. Cover several very, very key areas, including climate change, adaptation, and resiliency, climate justice and environmental justice, clean energy jobs and a just transition, and clean energy innovation and economic development. All the things that we're really often talking about here at New Yorkers for Clean Power and at other climate and energy advocacy groups, the importance of these areas. And we're really lucky here in New York to have this state process that we can all participate in and help make our energy plan the best that it can be to serve our people and our planet. Next slide, please. So this is sort of the timeline for the state energy planning process. They didn't put a lot of dates on this slide, but here we are in November, and we are in this first little yellow area, the draft scope. So they have put out what's called a draft scope, the scope being, okay, what should the energy plan address? You know, what is the sort of scope of work for the energy plan? And they did put out that draft scope, and we are in this public comment period that kicked off at the end of September and ends November 25th, unless it gets extended, which might happen. And so we're in this crucial period to comment on this draft scope and sort of say what should be in there and emphasize the key points that we want to see in the final scope, which will come out sometime later. And then after that final scope is put out, then a draft state energy plan comes out. And at that point, there's another opportunity for public comment, and there will be at least 6 actually in-person hearings. If you've been to these hearings, usually they have one during the day and one in the evening at the same location, and they'll have 3 upstate and 3 downstate, possibly even more. And they're saying in this slide, they anticipate those public comments, those public hearings to be in the summer of 2025. So this is a long process, and we're just getting started. So right now we just need to make sure that the scope, the draft scope, has everything in it that will lead to a really good plan. And so that's where we are right now. And so that's it for my introduction. And now I'm going to turn you over to our tremendous speakers. And I want to kick off by introducing our first speaker, who is Janet Joseph, who is a clean energy and sustainability consultant working on decarbonizing affordable housing. But when you hear consultant, you might not really understand the depth of Janet's experience. She has been working on climate change and clean energy for over 30 years. It was the architect of many of the programs and policies that have defined New York's nation-leading energy agenda. She was Senior Vice President for Strategy and Market Development at NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, where she led NYSERDA's work in building decarbonization, advancing programs and policies to deliver carbon neutral building stock. And that is only a portion of Janet's incredible biography. She's won many awards, sits on multiple boards, and has just incredible depth of experience and expertise. And we're so pleased to have Janet kick off this teach-in and really tell us more about the history of the New York State Energy Plan, why it's important, and and what it's done in the past and what we could see it do in the future. So Janet, without any further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. Lisa, thank you for that introduction. And as Lisa said, I have worked on clean energy and climate mitigation issues for many years, actually now several decades, and had the pleasure of co-chairing the Energy Efficiency and Housing Advisory Committee of the Climate Action Panel. But about 2 years ago, I left NYSERDA and started working on national initiatives. So today, I'm not the one who can speak to the details of the state energy plan. That's sort of a relieving kind of thing. But since I don't have an official role for the first time in many years, I can tell you what I really think. So I hope you find this to be helpful. No slides, no big data dumps from me, just some hopefully thought-provoking items. So I want to start maybe just taking it up one level. Why is New York's climate agenda and climate action so important? I'm sure everyone on this teach-in can appreciate that all of the action for the next 4 years will be subnational. I won't delve into that. We will have many conversations as a community about what that means, but that is a basic fact of our reality. Now, independent of this election, what New York State does in clean energy really matters, not just because we're a large state with a big economy, but if you look deeply into the built environment in New York, our built environment is among the hardest to decarbonize in this country. And I didn't quite realize that until I started looking deeply at ways to decarbonize in other regions. But we have many old buildings. We have lots of apartment buildings. We still have a lot of fuel oil. We still heat with resistance heating. It's cold in the winter and it's hot in the summer. Decarbonizing San Francisco, that's easy. Don't tell my friends in California I said that, but it's true. They barely heat in the winter. They barely cool in the summer. Decarbonization is easy. Same in parts of the Southeast, Maryland, Atlanta. They have a lot of electric heating. Believe it or not, they have a lot of heat pumps. Maybe they're not that efficient. They need to be upgraded. But a lot easier than what we have to do here. So what New York does on both the demand and the supply side really matters in terms of showing other regions what can be done to make major reductions in carbon emissions. And from Mother Nature's accounting system, which is really the only one that matters, our accounting is global. So when we think about policies in New York, we have to push for things that can be replicated in other regions. We have to show that even with our challenging building stock, we can decarbonize. Politically, in terms of our political accounting system, we have to push for policies that provide real co-benefits to real people in New York, even independent of this vexing global climate change issue. That's why our work is so hard. So New York is important in the national and the global climate battle for many reasons. Now in New York State, we have to pay attention to the state energy plan and the climate scoping plan. These are the major vehicles and the venues in which New York develops its clean energy initiatives and its climate policies. Now, there are other venues like our housing plan, and I often point to that. I don't feel like the advocacy community necessarily pays enough attention to that. There's $5 billion of funding or so, multiple billions in the housing plan. Of course, we have our beloved PSC dockets and legislative deliberations and the state budget. But the energy plan and the climate plan loom largest for our clean energy transition in New York State. So why is the energy plan important? The energy plan has its roots in the energy crisis of the 1970s. It is the place where we developed and advanced almost all of the progressive clean energy policies and practices that we have in New York State today. It's where the first RPS was advanced, our energy efficiency initiatives, solar initiatives, storage initiatives. When I first came to New York, I cut my teeth from a policy perspective on what was then the predecessor to the RPS. This was in the 1990s, and get ready for this, we were debating 300 megawatts of renewable energy, non-hydro renewable energy. And the opposition at the time said that 300 megawatts of solar and wind would bring the system down. So, same argument, same barriers, just different decades. So although we do have now, fortunately, a comprehensive climate plan in New York, we still have a statutory responsibility to produce an energy plan. And it has historically been the vehicle by which we have moved many progressive policies in New York. So let's pay attention to it. Okay, so what should we be looking for in this energy plan at this point in time, as the outline is being commented on, as drafts are being advanced? So I'm going to touch on 5 high-level things, and then Bob is going to dive into some of the details of what we think should be considered. First, we need alignment between the climate scoping plan and the state energy plan. In a large governmental system like New York's, confusion, or worse yet, conflict, causes delay. Bureaucracies freeze, things go slowly, and we do not have time for that. So we need to see at a minimum high-level alignment, ideally all the way down to perfect synergy of these documents. So that's point 1. Point 2, this energy plan is a medium-term plan. So, and by that I mean it's a 15-year plan, as Lisa said, 2025 through 2040. So I implore you to not get caught up debating how we will achieve the last 20% of greenhouse gas reduction, but rather laser focus on what we absolutely must do to achieve the next 20% of greenhouse gas reduction. And I've spent way too many conversations over the years, debating with different people, how are we going to get from 85% reduction of greenhouse gases to 95%? Let's just set that aside for now. Let's just figure out, we're at 30% renewables. How do we get the next 10% as fast as we possibly can? We have to focus on what we absolutely need to put in place in the next 5 to 10 years, which without those things, there's no way in hell we can get close to eliminating greenhouse gas emissions by mid-century. That's the second thing. The third thing, realize that the energy plan has its roots in system reliability. As I mentioned, it started back in the 1970s energy crisis, but even if you look at the objective statements in the draft outline, number 1 is system reliability. So all of the people who said we're going to bust the system with rapid electrification and non-baseload renewables will be hyper-mobilized for this state energy plan, perhaps more than any other plan in our history. This will be a loud refrain: system reliability and affordability. And those issues are real, and they will resonate politically. So the advocacy community needs to be armed to fight that battle and address the impacts on reliability and affordability as best you can. System reliability will be the primary lens with which recommendations are filtered, notwithstanding the other meritorious objectives that are outlined in the state energy plan. And just as one small example to sort of make that concrete, I'm on the Urban Greens Advisory Board. You may be familiar with the nonprofit Urban Green. They do a lot of great work focused in New York City, but also working statewide. Well, several years ago, when they started engaging with building owners to understand, why you're not going forward with decarbonization or with heat pumps and electrification, the number one issue is we don't have enough capacity. We don't believe the grid is reliable. So they partnered with the utility, they partnered with a credible analytical entity, and they mapped out network by network where that could be an issue and where that wouldn't be an issue. Now, maybe everybody can't do that, but we do need to be armed with those kinds of analyses or thinking through those kinds of issues. So that's point 3, system reliability, reliability, reliability. Point 4, and the last high-level point I will tee up. We have to evolve and expand from a narrow technocratic focus on the engineering requirements that keep the fuel flowing and the lights on to one that considers how our system, our infrastructure, and our practices need to change to increase the resiliency of human beings to survive within the new energy system dynamics and new climatic extremes. In short, we need more focus, not just on system reliability in this energy plan, but resiliency. We can't be afraid to talk about what happens when the lights go out and how people remain safe in that event. And we will have storms. We will have downed power lines. The lights will go out. We need to think through this. This is not just a New York issue. This is certainly a global issue. We will have extreme weather that will affect the totality of our infrastructure. And this is bigger than an emergency preparedness plan. Our future energy and related infrastructure policies and practices, they need to be shaped with these considerations in mind. And here too, I sat in too many conversations over the years where people are debating, oh, that shouldn't be in an energy plan. It should be in an adaptation plan. Oh, that's not a climate plan. It should be in a resiliency plan. It doesn't matter where it is, folks. We have to start thinking through the weather extremes that we will be faced with, this rapidly changing energy system and how it affects people. We need more focus on resiliency. And again, to try to make this real, I'll throw out some ideas. We have laws on the books today that landlords must provide for heating. Perhaps landlords need to be providing for cooling as well in our future climate. What does that mean to our energy system? Perhaps we need more community resiliency facilities with backup power. Perhaps we need to be designing homes with climate safe zones. Perhaps we need requirements for solar and storage on every new home and subsidies for those who can't afford it. Maybe we think about weatherization as increasing passive survivability in the event of power outage. We have gigawatts of solar that's not going to help us from a resiliency standpoint. What do we need to do to improve upon this? So, I think we have made in New York State tremendous progress in the climate scoping plan, developing a really comprehensive greenhouse gas mitigation strategy. And I'm proud to have participated in that activity. But I don't think we really have moved the needle on policies and practices that would develop a more resilient system at the central community and local level. And just to be clear, I am not in the camp of those people who think every change we're making to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase renewables is going to take the system down. I'm in the camp of we got to think through this, folks, and make sure that we're building in resiliency all the way down to the local level. So I am hopeful that this energy plan will pick up on those hard resiliency discussions in a very meaningful and substantive way. And these are hard conversations, but we have to start having them. So, in closing, I think everyone here can appreciate that goals in an energy plan or in a climate plan are meaningless unless they have the budgets or the regulations or the strategies to effectuate them. But in New York State, these plans are where it all starts and where our government grapples with aligning its different agencies, its financial resources, and its policies. So I encourage you as stakeholders to engage actively in this process. It is a very important moment in time in terms of our clean energy transition. And with that, I will stop and pass it back to Lisa.
Thank you, Janet. So I said this might sound a little boring, but I bet you're not bored now. I bet you're pretty excited about the opportunities in this regulatory proceeding here, this state energy plan. Janet pointed out so many important pieces, but I have to just lift up one thing, which is like, yes, our affordability and reliability important? Absolutely, they're important to us, and we should never shy away from saying how important those are to as climate advocates. And I sometimes think when they're saying, we're going to electrify everything and the grid's going to crash, and I think if only we were on a path to electrify quick enough that it would even make a dent in the grid, right? Like, how fast do they think this transition is happening? Like little house by house. It's going to take decades. So we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we'll do a better job at walking and chewing gum at the same time if we have a well thought out energy plan. So I want to now introduce to you one of the leading climate voices, not only in New York State, but really around the world, Dr. Bob Howarth, who is a Earth systems scientist and is at Cornell as well as at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. But we in New York know Bob best for his incredible work on the science of methane as a climate accelerant and the work that he did, lifting up the importance of that when methane gas leaks, it has this really big impact on warming our atmosphere. And so that when this whole idea that we were going to transition to gas from fracking as a climate, as a sort of a good step towards reducing carbon emissions, and what a complete falsehood that was. And he's done a lot of other work that maybe you're familiar with, most recently really influencing the Biden administration on the folly of LNG, which is liquid natural gas. He's just published hundreds of papers, authored 8 books. I could go on and on. And Bob is all of that and more. He's a scientist who is not afraid to be an activist. He was a leading voice on New York's Climate Action Council that worked tirelessly for 3 years to come up with our climate scoping plan. And somebody that I am also very pleased to call my friend. So Bob, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Lisa, my friend.
All right. So the floor is yours, and we have your slides.
Thank you for that. I'm really pleased to be here today, and it's an honor to speak after Janet Joseph, who's shown such leadership in our state energy plans for such a long time. She did a great job of setting the stage and talking about what we need to do. And I really want to highlight, I agree with her 1,000%. We often get pulled off into how we're going to get from 85% to 100% of the solution, 30, 40 years into the future. The real challenge is how are we going to greatly reduce the greenhouse gas emission majority and do so over the next 5 to 15 years? That's the real challenge, and that's a big enough challenge. And if we can make that challenge, I'm confident that the rest will follow pretty easily. So I believe we should focus on that. What I was asked to talk about today is the climate law, and specifically the Climate Action Council's role in implementing the climate law. So if we could go right to the second slide. Just a reminder for those of you who don't think much about the climate law, the CLCPA, it is the most progressive climate law of any state in the United States, in my opinion. I think it's one of the most progressive climate laws of any governmental entity anywhere in the world. And to me, the most important things are that it calls for 40% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030 across all economic sectors, calls for 70% of our electricity be from renewable sources by 2030, and it really pays attention to environmental justice attributes in a real way. The Climate Action Council took that very, very seriously. So what is the Climate Action Council? It's basically a commission. It's called the council, but it's a commission. It's established in the CLCPA by law, and the law required the council to come up with a blueprint for meeting these goals of the climate law. The blueprint is called the scoping plan. And by law, the council had to come up with a draft by December of 2022 and a final scoping plan by last December 2023. Under the law, once that plan comes forward, and it was passed last December, then all state agencies and authorities are required to take that guidance into their regulations, promulgate regulations to make it happen, and consider it in all of their actions. It often comes across in the press and all that the scoping plan is advisory. It's far more than advisory. It's a binding document. Next slide. So who's on the Climate Action Council? Well, I'm a member. I'm proud of that. Thank you for Lisa pointing that out. What I'm showing you here on the left are all of the members as of fairly early on in the process, and we won't go through everyone there, but I want to point out that there's by statute, a majority of the members are set up because of their importance in state function and state government. So it's co-chaired by the commissioner of DEC and the president of NYSERDA. Many other commissioners are on it, the president of the Long Island Power Authority, president of the New York Power Authority, et cetera, are all there. And then there are 10 other people who are appointed in various ways, either by the Assembly, Democrats, et cetera. The governor appointed some more people. I was a member appointed by the Democrats in the Assembly. I was very pleased to be there. On the right's the picture of us at our last meeting, which was December 19th of 2022, when we passed our plan. Some change in membership over time. People resigned or they changed jobs, and the statutory people changed. Next slide. Okay, this is right out of the final plan, and I'm not going to walk through the figure in any detail, but what I want to highlight is that we didn't pass our plan unanimously, but we did it by a 19-3 vote. Overwhelmingly strong support for the plan that we passed. I voted for it. So did every single person associated with state government who was a member of that commission. That, I think, this is not a radical plan put forward by extremists who are not in the real world. The majority of the people who voted for this plan, all of the people who are running our state government, voted to support the plan. And there's a tremendous amount of deliberation behind the plan. The council met 32 times over 3 years to come up with it. We also had 6 advisory panels, and Janet Joseph mentioned that she served on a committee of one of those. We had a huge number of additional people providing expertise to these 6 advisory panels. They mostly met in 2021. Cumulatively, they met for hundreds and hundreds of hours, all in public meetings. This is all transparent. In 2022, we set up 3 subgroups of the council itself to discuss particularly difficult topics. One of them was what we do with thinking about alternative fuels and others funding mechanisms, and those were hundreds of hours as well. After we came up with the draft plan in 2022, we put it out for public view, and we had 13 public hearings across the state. Over 1,000 people showed up in person and testified. and we received over 100,000 pages of written comment, and we paid attention to it. You know, the council members were at those hearings. I didn't go to all 13, but I was at 7 of them, and we looked through all 100,000 pages worth of input. So a very transparent process, huge amount of deliberation, huge amount of information. Next slide. So this is out of the executive summary of the plan, and we say that achieving the goals of the climate law is possible. It's entirely feasible to have deep decarbonization by 2050 and to meet the 2030 target of 40% reduction. The points we are really highlighting, the way to meet the goals of the CLCPA are through end-use electrification, beneficial electrification for heating and for transportation, making our homes heated with heat pumps. And the cost of doing nothing, we calculated, is higher than the cost of putting this in place. The cost of inaction to the people of the state in health costs from fossil fuel air pollution and from climate change are very, very real. And although this is an expensive plan, it's a necessary plan, and the cost of putting it forward, again, is less than the cost of inaction. Next slide. The plan creates a tremendous amount of jobs. Some people will lose their jobs. Interestingly enough, the people who are most at risk of losing jobs here are those who work in the small stores associated with gasoline filling stations. But we calculate that there'll be 10 times more job creation and overall better jobs, quite frankly, from implementing the plan. And the net direct costs of implementing the plan, although they add up, are small relative to the economy of New York. We can afford to do it and actually be good for our economy. It'll give us better public health and savings in our cost in the healthcare system as well. Next slide. And I just want, this again is right out of the plan, and I believe this strongly. Implementing the climate law is an incredible opportunity, one chance in a generation to rebuild our state in a way that would be better for everyone. Absolutely better for everyone. And I believe that the plan of the Climate Action Council will allow that to happen if it's implemented fully. Next slide. A little bit of detail here. This shows the greenhouse gas emissions for the state from 2020 up through 2050. And the top line there is what would happen if we didn't have a plan at all, and emissions would go down somewhat just because the world is moving towards lower emissions. But to meet the 40% reduction target by 2030, we need to do far more than that. And we came up with a series of scenarios which realistically can do it. So it's entirely possible. And we laid out the details for how to get there. Next slide. Can I go back one slide? I think you jumped there. Yeah, thank you. Again, the primary aspects of the scoping plan are an emphasis on beneficial electrification for both transportation and buildings, electric vehicles, electric heat pumps. Our electricity in the future, we think, will come largely from wind, solar, hydro with appropriate storage. Huge emphasis on equity, social justice, high quality jobs, health benefits as well. And throughout, we also put reliability number one throughout our deliberations of 3 years, and resiliency, because that's critical to it as well, and predictability of energy costs. The system we're putting forward will be better for consumers, if for no other reason, because it is in fact more resilient and predictable than our historical reliance on fossil fuels.
Oops.
Next slide. Just a little bit of detail on that. Again, beneficial electrification is the way forward. We spent a lot of time talking about what some might call false solutions, alternative fuels. We talked about renewable natural gas, biogas, biofuels. In the end, we did not recommend any of these. They're not mentioned in the executive summary. There's some discussion later on about perhaps we could do a little bit more research on them, but they're very, very minor, and we viewed them as a whole in the council, again by 19-3 vote with great skepticism. We also decided that there's not much role for hydrogen, certainly not in the gas pipeline system, maybe in transportation, but not for home heating or anything of that sort. Next slide. We also talked about the role of nuclear, and as a group, we endorsed continuing to support our current nuclear plants in the state as long as they're within their licensing agreement and continue to be run safely. But we came out pretty strongly against having new nuclear plants for this. And the reasons for that are that we viewed nuclear plants as too slow to deploy and too expensive relative to wind, solar, hydro, and storage. So it's an economic and time aspect that really drove our decision there. Next slide. This shows the final greenhouse gas inventory for the state of New York. Buildings are number one. So Janet's focusing on buildings. I'm focusing on buildings. The Climate Action Council focused on buildings. We have a real challenge. As Janet said, it's much harder here to decarbonize our building stock than it is in San Francisco. And this is where New York can and must show some real leadership. 32% of our greenhouse gas emissions statewide come from buildings. That's the official inventory. In my opinion, it's actually a little bit worse than that, just the detail, because that number that says industry there at 9%, more than half of that industry number is actually the oil and gas industry that's delivering fossil fuels to buildings. And I would put that over in the building inventory. Anyway, next slide. So what do we say about buildings? Well, we called for a zero emission building code with no fossil fuels in new buildings. We said after 2025. Legislature has now acted to make that 2027 for new homes and low-rise residential buildings, but it's enacted in law in addition to our recommendation. And we said 2028 for new commercial buildings. By law, it's now 2030. We have a huge effort that's necessary for retrofitting. We calculated you need 250,000 retrofits per year away from fossil fuels. That's 10 times what we've been doing in recent years. So that's a huge expansion. And in the future, we won't outlaw gas appliances, et cetera, short term, but long term, we would not allow them to be replaced. Next slide. Because we're calling for beneficial electrification, there's going to be an increase in demand for electricity, and that's shown here under all of our scenarios. So we not only need to decarbonize the existing electric system, but we need to increase the entire system and do so with zero carbon electricity. We believe that can be done. We are, of course, behind target for meeting the 2030 goal, but I'm still optimistic we can come close within a few years after that. Part of the reason we're slow, by the way, is that the consumption of electricity has grown faster in the state than we in the Climate Action Council were considering as of a couple of years ago. And that's not a result of beneficial electrification. It's because of things like data centers and cryptocurrency, in my opinion. Next slide. So this is what the future energy use by fuel type would look like according to our plans over the future. By 2050, most energy will be electricity. Natural gas will be completely gone by 2050, mostly gone by 2040, cut in half by 10 years from now, et cetera. Next slide. And that means we'll have this natural gas distribution system. And we spent a tremendous amount of time debating and discussing what to do with that gas distribution system into the future on the Climate Action Council. In the end, we says we need a strategic downsizing of the gas system, a rapid strategic downsizing. And the issue here is that you really cannot use the gas system to take hydrogen or renewable natural gas at scale to homes. It will not work. And we went through the analysis as to why. And as you move away from natural gas, those people who are last in their neighborhoods to go to beneficial electrification and are still using gas are going to find themselves facing very high price penalties for that, because the cost of maintaining that pipeline system goes up very, very high. So we really need a strategy for dealing with that. And we called for the state to consider moving whole neighborhoods, whole communities off of gas and on to, say, electrification at the neighborhood scale, one at a time, as perhaps the most efficient way forward. Next slide. Again, later on in the thing, we highlight energy efficiency is critical. We need to move away from fossil natural gas. Beneficial electrification is highlighted. And the other things which are so debated in the press, is there room for renewable natural gas, et cetera? No, there's not. And we spent a tremendous amount of time on that. So it's irritating beyond belief to not have that be finalized and put behind us. Next slide. I think that's probably my last one. Oh, no, financing. we came down recommending a cap and invest program as a primary means for financing the climate law. And essentially, that's a carbon fee that's applied across all economic sectors. The electric industry was suggesting to us that apply only to the electric sector. Other sectors were saying we should have different things. In the end, we said, let's have something that's uniform across sectors. We charged the DEC with implementing this cap and invest program to be in place by the end of December 2023. That hasn't happened. We're still behind, still being debated. I will say that our scoping plan was vague on details. We did not, in my opinion, put as much detailed information into there as would have been helpful. But we clearly anticipated that the fees behind this would be significant relative to the social cost of carbon. And the climate law charges the DEC with setting a social cost of carbon, which the DEC has done. And it's in the range for the mean value for carbon dioxide, $121 per ton of carbon dioxide. The fee schedule that the governor's office is talking about now is an order of magnitude lower than that. So there's some a big discrepancy here. Next slide. And that's my final presentation. Again, this is the council membership as of the end. We will be charged by law with being engaged again because the scoping plan has to be redone every 5 years, but we have not met for the last 2 years, and we probably will not meet for another year until such time as it's required by law that we get back to work and take a look again. Thank you for the chance to talk to you. And again, I'm very pleased to be part of this presentation today.
Thank you so much, Bob, for that great presentation. You can really tell when our presenters are beloved college professors. They're such good teachers, explain things so clearly and so well. And it was just a great overview of, the goals and plans that New York already has in place. Our opposition loves to say, we need a plan, not a ban. And I always sit there and say, but we have a plan. It's a good plan. Let's actually do it. So we have a plan. We made a plan. We put a lot of work into that plan. And now we're making another plan.
Exactly. We had a plan and the incredible amount of effort. And again, this plan did not come out of just the activist fringe. This came out of the central leadership of our state government, the people that our state most entrust to it, together with a series of others of us appointed. But it's a really good plan, and it should be fully followed and implemented. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. So our last speaker is somebody I'm very excited to introduce you to. This is Chris Casey of the Natural Resources Defense Council, also known as NRDC. You might be more familiar with NRDC. And Chris is a utility regulatory director of New York Climate and Energy at NRDC. He works with New Yorkers for Clean Power as part of the Better Buildings Coalition. So again, this emphasis on buildings, where we do care about emissions from all sources, but this is a group on this webinar really focused on the building sector because it is the biggest sector and it's so distributed and so challenging to make a good plan to decarbonize our buildings. Chris advocates to advance climate and clean energy policy priorities in New York at the New York Independent System Operator. That's the NISO. That's like the air traffic control for our energy grid. And before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, otherwise known as FERC. Yeah, Chris is an energy attorney with a lot of experience and a great list of credentials, which I won't go into all of them, but I'm very happy to have Chris finish out our webinar presentation or teach-in presentation today. And please go ahead and put your questions for our speakers into the chat. We will have time for Q&A after Chris is done presenting. And without any further ado, turn it over to Chris Casey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here to talk about some of the priorities in particular for the building sector in the state energy plan. So we already, I'll just cover this very quickly, but what is the state energy plan? It's going to be a comprehensive roadmap for building a clean, resilient, and affordable energy system for all New Yorkers. This plan is really what is going to guide the state and state agencies and policymakers as they are kind of making decisions. And this is really the process for making the Climate Action Council's scoping plan kind of legally binding on those agencies. So this is how we are going to kind of make that great scoping plan come official. And so we talked a little bit about this draft scoping, the Climate Action Council scoping plan. What is this draft scope that the planning board recently released? Well, it is basically outlining the process for kind of the planning process and what they're going to look at, the different studies and analyses that they are going to do, and the big questions that they're going to answer. So the draft scope was written to elicit feedback and provide an opportunity to for the public to give feedback on this scope. And once the scope becomes final, it again will kind of outline the framework and key areas for focus of the plan. It's going to decide, it's going to guide the planning process by identifying critical topics and objectives. It's going to ensure a comprehensive approach to meeting New York's future energy needs for a 15-year time horizon, so through 2040. And it will emphasize energy system reliability, economy-wide decarbonization, balanced cost, equity, and environmental, public health, and economic development objectives. So I'm going to focus on 6 priorities for this planning process, and which are also priorities for kind of feedback on this draft scope. And the first priority, and really the most important, is adherence to the Climate Action Council scoping plan. Our Climate Act really directed and requires that the state energy plan is takes the recommendations that were developed through this by the Climate Action Council. We've heard a bit of how much effort and collaboration among stakeholders across the state were put into developing that plan. It's a great plan. It has very, very strong elements, and we don't want the process of incorporating it into the state energy plan be used as a way to water down that great plan. So we really want the state energy plan to reflect the recommendations of the Climate Action Council, and should not revisit resolved policy decisions that were made in that scoping plan. The second priority is targets to guide the transition. I think this is particularly relevant for the building sector, and I would say also the gas system. The Climate Act established targets for New York State's electric sector, and those have been really helpful for guiding planning of new clean energy resources, of how we're going to evolve the grid, but we don't have similar targets for other sections of the other sectors in the economy, and that's presenting a real challenge. I also want to note that in addition to targets, we do to really fully enable a transition of the utility gas system, which really impacts several sectors of the economy, but in particular the building sector. We're also going to need some statutory changes that will allow us to downsize the gas system, because as the Climate Action Council scoping plan found, to achieve our climate goals and the emission limits in our Climate Act, we need to substantially reduce fossil gas and to strategically downsize the gas system. It's exceedingly difficult to downsize the gas system if we don't address the utility obligation to serve, which is a statutory provision concerning the regulation of gas utilities that essentially creates an entitlement to natural gas service. That it basically makes it so that it is that a single customer can kind of prevent a kind of neighborhood scale solutions that will allow us to kind of electrify neighborhoods and then shut down the gas system in those neighborhoods. And that can't happen everywhere, but it should be able to happen in a lot of places. And doing that is really fundamental to controlling the cost of the transition and really enabling electrification on at scale. So we need some statutory changes to really enable that gas system transition, but we also need some targets to guide the transition. Luckily, the draft scope does make clear that establishing clear targets and a time frame for the gas system transition is a priority. We definitely want them to hold them to that. And I think as part of the analyses that they'll be doing to kind of develop the state energy plan, they should look at a variety of targets. In the environmental community, we've been talking about a number of different ones. I think there's a lot of folks who think an emission limit for the entire building sector is necessary and would be very helpful. It certainly would be helpful, although I don't think that in and of itself kind of gives all the guidance that is necessary for the gas system transition, because the building sector, buildings get their energy from more than natural gas. They get it from electricity, from delivered fuels. And so having a kind of a target for the building sector kind of wouldn't exactly answer how much gas utilities need to reduce their emissions, and it wouldn't kind of provide further clarity around whether we should be fully committing to electrification, which is really the best and most equitable path forward. So there might need to be other standards in combination or different standards to really fully enable that gas system transition. Some of these could be things like goals for reducing gas demand, for goals for downsizing downsizing parts of the gas system once some of those statutory changes are made, and there might be others as well. And so that's something that we plan on encouraging the to be evaluated as part of the state energy planning process. The next priority I want to touch on is demand side management. Scoping plan found that emphasis and focus on demand side management needs to be placed on permanent load reduction measures that can significantly reduce fossil gas usage and in the short term, while providing benefits to end users. Energy efficiency and demand flexibility really should be the cornerstone of our energy strategy. It's really kind of the best, most equitable way to push forward decarbonization and to manage the costs of the clean energy transition. And the benefits are really hyper local. When we make buildings more efficient and capable of interacting with the grid so that individuals can shift when they use electricity, the ways we do that provides real benefits to New Yorkers. It makes their homes, the buildings that they live and work in, more comfortable, more pleasant to be in. It increases the value. Those investments also are often, for the most part, are retained and owned by the owners of those buildings. So, and they're not going to what might be, big corporations from other states or even that are multinational corporations. And so this is a way to really make sure that the benefits stay in our communities, and by doing it, we create lots of jobs and economic benefits as well. So demand side management is absolutely essential for kind of controlling costs and making sure that New Yorkers really feel the benefits of this clean energy transition on a day-to-day basis. The fourth priority is limiting the role of low carbon fuels. As we've already talked about a little bit today, the scoping plan rejected low carbon fuels like RNG and clean hydrogen as primary tools for decarbonizing the gas system and buildings. Reliance on low carbon fuels for decarbonizing the gas system and buildings really comes with tremendous amount of risk because of the costs associated with those fuels, as well as their limited ability, and too much reliance on a strategy of low carbon fuels also kind of perpetuates our dependence on fossil gas infrastructure. And so we really want to electrify everything that can be electrified. Where low carbon fuels are used, we really want to cabin their role to hard to electrify use cases. Often these are outside of the building sector. They are, things like transportation, aviation, long-haul trucking, things of that nature. With respect to the gas system, when we're thinking about hard to electrify, we don't want to just think of what are the hard to electrify buildings, but we really want to think about what are the hard to electrify kind of segments of the gas system, because they have maybe clusters of customers that will be hard to electrify, and so they will be the areas of the gas system that are likely to be around for the longer term. And in those areas is where we can kind of, channel the limited low carbon fuel use, and where investment in the gas infrastructure is more appropriate. And I'll also mention that New York needs a framework for dealing with the environmental attributes associated with low carbon fuels. We don't have one right now, and to the extent that low carbon fuels like RNG are being developed in New York, those attributes are largely being sent out of state to places like California, where they've created frameworks for kind of channeling those attributes to the best and highest uses. So we need something in New York that can kind of maintain the integrity of those environmental attributes, just like we have on the electric system for clean energy, where we create renewable energy credits for renewable energy that's produced, and we make sure that those kind of credits are paired with the energy use, so that they're not double counted, and so that they're directed where they should be. So we need something similar on for low carbon fuels on the gas side. Priority 5 is promoting affordability. We need to prioritize support for low-income households and disadvantaged communities, to expand affordability programs. We will also need to develop rate structures that encourage electrification and minimize energy burdens. Energy efficiency and demand flexibility, demand side management are incredibly important tools for this. We also, in promoting affordability, the state is going to need to address the operating cost disparities of gas versus electricity. Right now, it's in most instances, it is cheaper for households to heat their homes with gas than it is electricity, even if you install a high efficiency heat pump, for example, and so we need to address that because we are not sending kind of price signals to consumers that are consistent with our policy goals, and so they are making achieving those goals more difficult. And kind of the costs associated with electricity or gas, those things are not just innate to those things. They are dependent on the regulatory structures and the policies that that the state puts in place. So the state has lots of control over the cost of electricity or gas, and it has plenty of tools to essentially make it so that that gas is not cheaper than electricity. One of the tools that will be, I think, very important for this is establishing cap and invest, where we are hoping that the state is going to put out kind of draft regulations for its program in, within the next month or so, before the end of the year. But this is going to be an essential tool for correcting some of these price signals. It will make gas a bit more expensive, but it'll also raise a lot of money that can be used to address affordability for low-income customers. And it has already indicated at least a third of the funds raised will be used for that purpose. And then it's also going to be absolutely essential for raising money to make investments that will drive decarbonization. So, I think that is an important program that folks should focus on. And then the last priority I want to just touch on is, really focusing on equity and implementation. The state energy plan and all the recommendations that come out of it really need to be analyzed under Section 7.3 of the Climate Act, which essentially requires all state agencies and any action that they are taking to look at the impact of those decisions on disadvantaged communities, and if there is a disproportionate impact, to do something to remedy it. We also need to really make sure that at least 40% of the benefits of the transition and the investments made are prone to disadvantaged communities. The Act requires no less than 35%, sets a goal of 40. I think at least 40 is more than achievable, and there's going to need to be robust tracking of those benefits to ensure this is happening. And then also we need to emphasize clean energy job training and accessible financing for projects that will drive the clean energy transition. And on the job front, we need better information. So I think there's an opportunity in the state energy plan to do some analyses that help us better understand the challenges of transitioning the workers that are in fields that are going to shrink, people who work in kind of fossil industry, and to make sure that we can transition those workers equitably. But then also we need to better understand the workforce needs of our clean energy future and make sure that we are training folks to do the jobs that are necessary to drive the transition. I'll just end with a quick call to action. I don't mean to preempt Lisa, but this is an opportunity to make your voice heard. Public comments on the draft scope you're currently due, I think it says here November 25th, I think it's November 24th, it's a typo, but NRDC requested an extension of the comment period until December 23rd. We think that will likely be granted, and you can submit comments via the State Energy Plan webpage, which is part of NYSERDA's website, or through the email address here.
Thank you so much. It is not a typo. It is currently the 25th. And thanks so much, Chris. And we do have a take action for you ready today. This take action is from the Renewable Heat Now campaign. It is only focused on the building sector, which has been the main focus of our action here. We just launched it yesterday, and we're really trying to get a lot of comments. The main points in this Renewable Heat Now comment are taken from an organizational sign-on letter for the draft scope that is going to be put out. It was supposed to be ready today. It's almost ready to go to organizations to sign on. And that is a longer form letter with much more detail and all the nerdy details. It's like a 5 or 6 page letter. It's being drafted jointly by the Sierra Club's attorney, Josh Berman, New Yorkers for Clean Power Zone, Anshul Gupta, and Malak Nazarine from the Building Decarbonization Coalition. So if you are a rep of an organization, be on the lookout in the next few days for an email asking you to sign on to the longer organizational sign-on letter for the draft scope as it regards buildings. But in the meantime, please help us to generate comments that are like the Renewable Heat Now comment, or the or just spread this Renewable Heat Now comment far and wide They're just the simple points about the need for building decarbonization, using heat pumps, and really making a strategic plan for that so that we're have a preference for the most efficient systems, which is ground source heat pumps and thermal energy networks, because, as Janet referred to earlier, the grid, the strain on the grid as we electrify is a real thing. We do really have to plan for that. So we have to be strategic. We can't just, not only do we need to electrify our home, our heating, our cooling, and our appliances, but we need to be thoughtful and strategic about it so that as we build our grid response and reliability, and we electrify, that those two things go together, and we have the kind of reliable and affordable energy services going forward. And we just want to make sure that as we're doing this, these false solutions that are being proposed for buildings, this hydrogen blending in pipes, which is incredibly expensive, very untested, extremely dangerous, and really just it's a Trojan horse. It's a false solution. As well, it's just a sort of a pipe dream of the gas utilities trying to continue their bottom line and not have to downsize the gas system, which, as one of our presenters mentioned, is not an easy thing to do, but it is a necessary thing. So we have to make a good plan for that. We need to protect affordability, especially for the New Yorkers that are already energy burdened and paying proportionally so much more of their household income for energy. We need to protect those folks as we make this transition from having to pay higher prices. And we need to put, as Chris said, we need to have actual emissions limits put on the gas utilities instead of just as the CLCPA does on power generation. We have to have emissions limits in the other sectors, and those have to be set by the state, which they're actually overdue at doing. Since this is a buildings comment, we focused on the gas utility sector. And really just emphasizing that, hey, this scoping plan, the climate action scoping plan that the Climate Action Council put out and was was finalized at the end of 2021, I think, so long ago, or 2022, maybe it was. No, I think it was 2021. Anyway, is the law and should be followed. And this new energy plan should in no way backtrack or undermine our existing plan. So please sign this comment. Please share it out with 10 friends. Email it out. If you are on the Renewable Heat Now listserv, you got this comment in your email yesterday. And if you're on the NYCP listserv, you will get it next week in our email. And please forward that around. So that's it for me. And I'm just now going to see what questions we have. We do have some time left for questions for our panelists. And the simplest one is if there's a comment deadline extension for the scope, when would we know that? Do you know the answer to that, Chris?
I don't. We submitted that earlier this week. They acknowledged receipt of it and didn't give indication on when they would rule on it, but I suspect they will do it sooner than later because the deadline is coming up.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to field some of these questions. Let's see. A question from Roger to Bob. It says on November 4th, 2024, the DPS staff proposal concerning definitions for key terms notes that, quote, pursuing the 2040 target will require the deployment of novel technologies and their integration into a changing grid. Should there be a feasibility analysis in the energy plan to address their concern about the new technologies? Bob, do you want to shed some light on what this is about?
Well, I'm not familiar with the particular request that went forward that way. I can give you the perspective of our 3 years of discussion in the Climate Action Council, and that is that we firmly stated that the goals can be met with existing technologies. We don't need novel technologies. Now, having said that, you know, there are a lot of details to work out. Energy storage is going to be critical. Lisa, you made the point that ground source heat pumps and thermal networks are better than air source heat pumps. They're hugely more effective in the peak time of January. If we go that route, we don't need anywhere near as much capacity for electric capacity overall. I would add that thermal storage is cheaper than electrical storage for energy, and particularly if you have a thermal network, you can store heat that can provide a community with heat for weeks to months to even an annual basis. There are communities in Saskatchewan, I believe, where they store heat for 6 months at a time, which is very, very cheap compared to other things. But those aren't new technologies. Those are existing current technologies. Will the technologies get better? Yes, but we don't need new technologies to meet the goals of our climate law. You know, Mark Jacobson from Stanford, whom I think is the most brilliant engineer I know, he and I and others wrote a plan back in 2013, February of 2013, more than 10 years ago, laying out specifically how to make the state of New York fossil fuel free on a realistic time frame. And we made the case then, more than 10 years ago, that we didn't need new technologies and it was cost effective then. And it's even more so now. So this whole idea of we're waiting for the next new technology, it's an excuse for inaction, and we don't need to wait.
Thank you for that, Bob. My husband was a Navy officer, and he always said, you know, it's such folly to always be chasing the next technology when you have some really good technology that you know that works. Not that we should never innovate, but there's always this dream that there's something better out there.
Yeah, no, innovation's critical, right? And it's
Right.
going to happen, but it's not something we wait for. We don't need to wait.
That's right.
We move ahead. You know, the analogy I made, forgive me, just an aside, but you know, the United States made a huge transition from horse and buggies to cars about a century ago. And the first cars looked a lot like horse-drawn carriages. They had brakes, which were levers that you pulled against the wheel, and you know, pulleys for steering. We didn't wait for rack and pinion steering and disc brakes in order to move ahead with cars. Cars, maybe cars are a bad idea, but the fact is that we moved to cars, we made the transition almost totally in 15, 20 years, and cars got better and better and better and continue to get better and better. Now they're electric. But you don't wait for the final technology to make the transition.
That's right. This question is for Janet. It's from Susan Janet, and this is something that's on many of our minds, which is what is the climate plan and the climate scope? You know, are they going to tackle pre-electrification? You mentioned how old our building stock is, how decrepit our building stock is. And I've certainly seen many homes up close, including my own, that are hard to weatherize and electrify. Where does that fit in? Because as we know, you know, when you can't weatherize and electrify, it's not just a cost issue, it's also a climate issue, a health issue, a safety issue, so many issues with our buildings.
Right. So I want to address that, but I want to build on something that Bob said and kind of connect back to my earlier comment about, like, we have to focus on what it is we can get done now in terms of climate reduction. I'll throw one out there that I just don't hear people talking about enough. We have 2 million households in New York State that heat with oil, electric resistance, or propane. Those are the lowest hanging fruit in terms of converting to high efficiency heat pumps. And many of those people are low income New Yorkers. Can we get that done first while these cost reductions and innovations are happening? So, you know, we want innovations to happen. We need cost reduction, but can we be clear-eyed on what we can get done quickly? And I would shine a light on that sector. I don't feel there is enough explicit attention on that subsegment of the buildings market, which is really large in New York State. So I just wanted to sort of add that on as as a build on. We make progress now while, we support innovation over the long term. I'd love to hear a little more conversation and advocacy behind that segment of the building market and the people who live in those buildings. So just wanted to throw that in there. And Susan, your point is a great one. Often when we look at these older buildings, there's work that needs to be done before we start changing the fundamental energy systems. And this was one of the really good things about the climate action plan. The panel that I was involved in focused on energy efficiency and housing. And the commissioner of housing and I worked together on that. So we were able to see, by building in what we can in our housing plan that could improve the overall quality of the building, and doing so with an eye towards sustainability, maybe we can then address the issues of you deal with the mold, you upgrade the system, and you make it happen at the same time. I know there are current programs at the national level from HUD that are providing funding to deal with those pre-electrification things as well as the sustainability initiatives. I hope that funding continues into the future. It is a problem that has, I would say, constrained NYSERDA, for a number of years. It's like we had to focus on the narrow energy upgrades. But that was the beauty of the strategies put forward in the climate action plan. You had housing and energy sort of working together. That's what we need to do. And even, it's the Green and Resilient Homes initiative that came out under the IRA from HUD is actually trying to do that, marrying sustainability and the home upgrades. So we have to do it. We have to be mindful of it. And it's hard to get that stuff done just within the construct of an energy entity or the energy plan. But I think we as stakeholders and advocates need to speak to those issues. In the climate action plan, we did acknowledge that. We did talk about how important those make ready type investments are, in particular for low income housing. So we have to figure out how to get it done. But it often requires some collaboration of different funding sources and multiple agencies to pull it off. And maybe some of these resources that come out of some of the funding initiatives can have a little broader of a reign. That would be ideal.
Yes. Yes, braiding resources, one of our favorite topics here in energy nerdland. Here's a provocative question. I'm not sure who wants to take this, but Martha raised, here we hear, oh, well, we can't electrify our homes and our cars because we're going to crash the grid. But yes, let's do AI and crypto in New York, these massive energy demands that everyone's super excited to bring to New York State, which would, on their own, is my understanding, be an absolute incredible user of energy and power. Is this something that is being looked at and needs to be looked at in the state energy plan? Who wants to take that one? It's a hot one, hot potato.
Well, let me stick my neck out because I like hot potatoes. We didn't consider it all in the Climate Action Council because this has all happened since then, right? But I will point out that the entire nation of China has actually banned crypto mining in China because they're trying to meet climate goals and energy goals, and they view it as a huge distraction. So I haven't actually seen good data. I referred earlier to the fact that we've got huge electric growth in New York. And I said, maybe it's due to the data centers and crypto. I actually haven't seen good data on that, but it's hard to see what else is going on. I think the state really should make a priority of figuring out what is driving the increase. Our electric rates have gone up hugely. My electric rates are 80% more than 3 years ago. What's driving that? And it's not electrification for beneficial uses. There's something else going on. So we really need to look at that very, very critically. And I think we need to think about what's in the interest of our state to promote and not in that category. Personally, I would urge a go slow approach on those.
And, from a modeling standpoint, the state always tries to do sort of a high load growth scenario, a low load growth scenario. In this instance, that high growth scenario has to factor in these broader economic changes, such as the one that you outlined. So I would expect that my former colleagues at NYSERDA are trying to figure out how to model that, but there is a a paucity of data, and it's still projection at this point. But I think the takeaway is we have to make sure there is a high growth scenario that reasonably reflects those broader economic changes, and then iterate from there in terms of what the policy objective is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything to add, Chris?
Yeah, I would just say that one, a lot of that load growth is speculative, but I would also say that we need to really consider policies that will enable that kind of load growth in a smart and strategic way. And so, I talked about it before, but it's equally applicable for the large energy users. We need to make sure that those large loads are doing everything they can to minimize their energy use, and then also to be flexible in their energy use. And not all kind of large loads can do that, but some certainly can. And for the ones that can, being able to kind of shift to off-peak hours or kind of off-peak times will do an incredible amount for maintaining reliability, and that bears out in the reliability studies that NYSERDA has been doing.
Yeah, thanks for that. Even in my little house here with my electric car charging, we're very happy that we can turn on the charging with an app at 11:30 at night when we go to the off-peak lower rates. So that works. It can work on a bigger scale. So,
yeah, and in particular, it's those crypto loads and potentially loads associated with developing clean hydrogen have a real potential for being able to kind of be interruptible or kind of lower their use during peak times, and that will be could be incredibly important, especially as we become a winter peaking system.
Right. Right now, we're nowhere near to being a winter peaking system still. So I'm going to finish with a very provocative question from someone named Bob. A question that's on many of our minds. Maybe we don't have the answers yet, or we aren't ready to answer this question, but a little over a week ago, it was election day, and people are wondering, how does the change at the federal government level impact New York's climate action plan, climate and state energy plan? Or does it impact? Are we completely impervious here in New York from what happens at the federal level? Or are we going to have to watch out for how our own climate progress could be sabotaged or undermined by the incoming administration? So it is 1:30. We promised only to go to 1:30, but I want to end with that question. If anyone has an answer for Bob, and if you don't, it's okay. A lot of people are really trying to analyze this and find these answers now, and it's okay to not know or not even have a guess. But if you want to guess or have something, Janet has something to say. Yay, go Janet.
Yeah, New York is not impervious to these changes that will take place in the Inflation Reduction Act, and we have to pay careful attention to it. I'm sure right now people are poring over the funding losses that could be associated with it. I mean, the good news is some of the funds that have already flowed to the states, those funds are not likely to be retracted. There's too much political risk. But we bank and base a lot of our assumptions on the existence of these federal tax credits. And what I hear is that some of these tax credits are indeed quite vulnerable with the House, with the Senate, with the White House. So it affects the economic viability of what we could pull off here in New York. We are not an island. I'm fairly confident New York will continue to push green and sustainability, but our work will be a lot harder given what's happened in DC.
I would agree with that. It's going to be harder, but it's also all the more critical that we do so.
Exactly.
And at one level, it's also another opportunity because, if we can make it work right in New York, continue with beneficial electrification, particularly of heating, taking on our heating stock, we have the capacity to build more heat pumps locally. I mean, this is the future. It really is. It's going to be true globally. And if New York can play a leadership role in there, I think it's an incredible opportunity for our state. So is it harder? Yeah, absolutely. But we need to do it. We should do it. It's the right thing to do, and I think it's good for the state, economically as well as morally.
All right. Well, I think we should end with that positive note and call to action from our friend Dr. Howarth. We must do it. It is the right thing to do. It will be beneficial to us and good for us as well. So thanks everybody for being here. We'll be sending out the recording and answers to any outstanding questions in a few days. And please, once again, do take action at our link. It's really does make a difference when to see the number of comments coming in supporting these basic principles on electrification, and look for the email coming soon with the organizational sign-on letter, and please turn it around quickly. We're going to try to get a couple hundred organizations signed on to that letter about the building. So thanks everybody for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend. Giving the only advice I have for everybody right now, which is get outside, be with friends, be with family, drink water, and let's just all keep going. So thanks so much. And thanks so much to our panel. Thanks to my back end team here at NYCP, Lorenzo and Melissa, who make all this possible, to Betta and Anshul, who set up this webinar, who aren't here today. And our whole team thanks all of you for being a part of our energy advocacy space, and we'll see you out there.